Hello, I'm Irene Natividad. I'm president of the Global Summit of Women, which is a business and economic forum for women that is now celebrating its 30th anniversary. During this time, we have also been doing research on women on corporate boards. And in the 23 years since we started doing that, we have put out 30 reports, the 30th being the one that you will hear from today. Why did we start doing that? Because we wanted benchmarks for different industries, different countries, different regions against which we can measure progress. And not every country does research or has numbers in terms of women serving on the boards of their largest companies. So we decided to do that since 1996. Primarily also because the Global Summit of Women itself is a business economic forum for women. And so what we need is data so that we know what to do going forward. So in sharing with you our report today, we will also be guided by our chair for this session, Angela Mackay, who is the Managing Director of Financial Times for the Asia Pacific region. She is also the global publisher for FT Live, and she serves on the global board of Financial Times. She is a summit veteran in our eyes, which is why we always ask her to come back. So, Angela, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Irene. I'm not quite sure I like being called a veteran. It makes me sound really old. I'm very pleased to introduce our three panelists for this session who will be sharing their views on the report's findings. The first is Kesara Manchusree. She is chair of the Thailand Securities Depository and the former CEO of the Stock Exchange of Thailand, where she focused on ESG for the SET and other listed companies covering environmental and social responsibility. She's also a board director of several listed companies and social enterprises in Thailand, so she's a poster girl for the cause. Next up is Kathy Matsui, and who is also a great role model for women in business in Japan. Kathy is Vice Chair and Chief Japan Equity Strategist for Goldman Sachs in Japan. She's also a member and has helped oversee the launch of Goldman Sachs's $500 million commitment to narrow the gender investing gap. And that's called Launch with GS, right, Kathy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's correct.
And finally, we have Zarinah Anwar, the former chair of the Securities Commission in Malaysia and the chairperson of Malaysia Debt Ventures Berhad. Zarinah is also founder of the 30% Club in Malaysia, and I know Kathy's got has a lot of connections with 30% Club outside Japan, and I do as well in Hong Kong. So I'll hand back to Irene, who's going to present us with the report, which I hope our panelists have had time to peruse, and we're going to we'll have a discussion about our female board representation in Asia Pac. So over to you, Irene.
Thank you. I just want to preface by saying that this report covered 20 economies and specifically 1,573 countries. What we did was to look at the 100 largest as listed in some stock exchanges are smaller and didn't include everybody, so we also added some large privately held companies. The data that we looked at is true as of March 2020, actually way before the pandemic started raging across the world. This is the cover for the report, and you can access the findings on www.globewomen.org. The arm for the research that we do is Corporate Women Directors International. Not only do we do research, we also convene women on corporate governance issues in different parts of the world. And we pioneered the market opens, two of which you see here. 2006, when I opened NASDAQ with 120 women corporate directors, and in Tokyo in 2017. We've now opened 20 stock exchanges with women only to ring the opening bell. So what did we find in our report? As you will see, we only have, slide please, 15.1% of board directorships are held by women in the entire region. We do it this way, this graphic, so you can see exactly what that means, how few we are. But remember that 15.1% is an average. So there are economies that do better than others and some that do not so well. I would say in the region, the majority do not do so well. So next slide, please. In 2017, when we were in Tokyo at the Global Summit of Women, we released the first Asia Pacific report. And at that time, as you can see, only 12.8% of board seats were held by women. 3 years later, 15.1. That's not a big deal, right? What that amounts to is less than 1% increase yearly. And I have to tell you, that is the pattern globally. It isn't just in the Asia Pacific region. So how does the region compare with others? As you will see near the bottom half of this regional comparison, Europe does better, 29.2%. Actually, that's the average because many do much better than that. US and Canada, 28.6%. Africa, look at that, at 19.1%. So Asia Pacific is near the bottom with Latin America at 8.3%. And the Middle East, North Africa region at 3.7%. Now, how do each of the countries now compare with each other? And as you will see, we did 4 groupings. Those who are leading in terms of the highest percentages of women directors, Australia leads in the entire region with 33.1%. Secondly, Malaysia at 26.4%. New Zealand with 24.7%. These 3 countries happen to have proactive strategies for moving the numbers. Now, in the second tier, we have a grouping that we call growing. And these are the ones that are above average, above the 15.1%. And Vietnam leads here at 17.2%. The Philippines, secondly, at 16.6%. In fact, Singapore, Thailand, and did you see this? Papua New Guinea, 16.4%. Not bad. India at 15.7%. Below average are the next 2 groupings. Emerging, we call Mongolia, Hong Kong, SAR. Frankly, the surprises about Hong Kong. Laos, Pakistan, and Chinese Taipei or Taiwan. Underperforming countries are Japan, although 9.7% is an all-time high. China at 8.8%, world's second largest economy. Cambodia, South Korea, 4.2%. I have to tell you, in global research we've done over the years, their numbers haven't moved much. And Brunei Darussalam at 3.6%. So these are the last 2 tiers, if you will, aren't great percentages. So the question is, are there any signs of progress? And yes, there are. So let me point them out to you. First of all, the majority of the companies among this 1,573, 74% have at least 1 woman director. That wasn't true. The percentage was much lower 3 years ago. Secondly, we now have 274 companies, or only 17.4%, that have reached a point of critical mass. That means they have 3 or more women directors. There are studies that indicate that when there are 3 or more directors, women directors on a board, they have greater impact than when there are only 1 or 2. And then lastly, there's a tiny smidgen, 33 companies that have actually reached 50% parity or actually have female-dominated boards. I will show you the list later, but this is actually incredible, which means that, something is happening that is good. So, why are some countries doing better than others? The answer is because they've adopted strategies like the quota that has been, running through many other countries that enables larger percentage of women to access board seats. There are now 18 countries you see here with quotas for women on boards, and among them are 4 from the Asia Pacific region. Malaysia in 2011, that had a quota announced by executive order by its prime minister at that time. India, Pakistan, and South Korea also have legislated quotas, which means their parliaments voted on it. And their target is each board of a publicly listed company should have at least 1 woman director. Malaysia has a bigger target, which is 30%. And as you saw in the chart before, they're coming close to that. So let me show you the other part of the quota countries. The ones that are quotas for state-owned companies. This is now what? There are 26 countries for a total of 44 countries now with quotas for women on boards. I'm showing you this so you understand that this is not a one-off. It is a growing phenomenon. In fact, in 2004, when we started looking at quotas globally, I think there were only about 2 countries that had them, Israel and Norway, that had them for women, for publicly listed companies. Now it covers a whole slew. What's a state-owned company? They're utilities, they're airlines, they're actually major companies in which the government has a major stake or owns it entirely. So do quotas work? Let's see. And as you will see, they do. Look at Malaysia. Before this quota or target was announced by the Prime Minister, they were stagnant at 7.6%. Look where they are now, 26.4. That they have the second highest increase in the entire region. India, look at that. They quadrupled their number in what, 6 years, 5.1% to 15.7%. And then in Pakistan, which is fairly recent, in 3 years, they have doubled their numbers. Now in India, because of the rush to meet the deadline, which was moved to 2015, some women who were named to the boards were relatives of owners or officers. And so the government passed a new law that is requiring each company to now have independent women directors, at least 1. The reason why Malaysia does so well, because it was a coherent effort that involved the government. The Ministry for Women was doing training to make women board ready. Zarinah Anwar, whom you just met, who was the Securities Commission chair, actually gave a grant to the Institute of Corporate Directors to create a database for women on boards. And then, of course, there were private sector efforts as well. So it was a lot more people were involved. Now, not everyone loves quotas. In fact, there are many women who say, I don't want to be appointed because I'm part of a quota. And many of you know my answer to that. Get over it. We now have a door that we can use to access board seats. And as long as we have a seat at the table, that's what's important. Now, the next strategy that's used by many other countries is to include gender diversity into corporate governance codes. Sometimes they're housed in stock exchanges, in separate commissions, or they are, as in the case of Finland, by the Chamber of Commerce. And basically, it makes gender diversity a principle of good corporate governance. And here, Australia is the gold standard. You have 8 countries in the region that have adopted this, but Australia's stock exchange made gender diversity on boards a listing requirement, which meant companies had to disclose the percentage of women on boards, the percentage of women in senior management and among their workers, and their strategy for improving those numbers. Again, here, there was a coherent effort between the stock exchange, the Human Rights Commissioner, who created the Male Champions of Change, and the media that kept covering it. So it became a topic that was before the public, if you will, and became understandable. And that those are the components that I see that makes for a good strategy in terms of moving the needle for women on boards. So does it work? Next slide. Yes, it does. As you can see in Australia, when they first began, 8.6% about a decade ago to now 33.1%. So they have the highest rate of increase. New Zealand, also impressive, about 10 points increase. They did not push as much their stock exchange. They made gender diversity a recommendation as opposed to a requirement. And so, their numbers didn't move as much. Singapore, however, saw what? A 4-point increase and 3 points in Japan. Now, that may not look like a great percentage to you, but let me tell you, our first report on Japan was in 1999. Among 2,396 companies, we found 0.01 women on boards. So 9.7 looks terrific. So next slide, please. Remember I told you about the 33 companies that now have 50% or more? Take a look. There are actually 2 slides here. And what you will see is that the countries that have proactive strategies, whether targets, quotas, or corporate governance principles of gender diversity, are the ones that are present in larger numbers in this best performers list. Look who's number 1, Vietnam, the Vinhua Corporation. And that company, by the way, is headed by a woman. Number 2 is Thailand. And you will see this is a power company, an energy company, and majority female board. Actually, Thailand has 2 companies in the top 10, as well as the Philippines, where I was born, as well. So they're not necessarily having yet the strategies that I mentioned, but they're clearly moving in the right direction. So what did we learn from this report? Slide, please. First, you need a national strategy. In the US, we have a lot of strategies by several nonprofits or private sector or, management consulting firms, but no national strategy. Quotas are national strategy. Gender diversity in corporate governance code, a national strategy. So it should be looked at. We should also look at the business case for more women on boards. Appended to the final report itself is almost 100 studies that show a correlation between more women on boards and more women and better financial performance of a company. The last one was by 2019 by the IFC of the World Bank, the International Finance Corporation. And they showed 6.4% return on ROE, on return on equity, for companies that have at least 30% women directors, compared to only 4.6% return on equity for all male boards, for companies that only have all male boards. And lastly, whether you have a quota or whether you have this corporate governance approach, it still doesn't stop companies from creating a more proactive pipeline for women into senior executive roles. Because otherwise, we will continue to have board nominations be done through Old Boys Club. We need to create that pool of future women directors. And that will not happen unless we keep increasing women into the C-suites. So that's our report. Thank you for listening. The actual report itself is about 77 pages, and we will show you on our website how to access it. So back to you, Angela.
Thank you very much, Irene. That was as ever, a very interesting summation of where we are right now in Asia Pacific. I always think to myself, why are we still having this conversation about women's representation in the corporate world? It's very frustrating, actually, because you can see the immense amount of talent, you see the number of graduates coming through universities. It's very clear that women are just as qualified as men, but there is still this issue about pushing people through the career path and popping them out the other end and hanging on to them on the way. So I've got three wonderful speakers here who know a lot about this topic and have their own very well-formed opinions. So just a quick fire run around the three of you. Why do you think Asia-Pacific countries have lagged behind other regions? Obviously, there's uneven development in economies in this region, but just off the top of your head, just a couple of comments from each of you. Maybe Kathy, start with you.
Sure. And it's a pleasure and honor to be with all of you, distinguished panelists. I would say from a Japan perspective, I'm actually Japanese American, so born and raised in America, but lived in Japan for the last 3 decades. I would say that I think in countries, maybe Japan as well as South Korea is concerned, we just heard from Irene, there's such a powerful business case for increasing diversity in management and leadership and boards in particular. But while that is obvious to many, maybe outside of Japan and Korea, it's still not completely embedded in the psyche of, I think, Japanese people, society, media, and managements here, which is kind of why we embarked on our Womenomics research 21 years ago to kind of elevate and draw attention to this issue, particularly for a country like Japan, where, literally within 35 years, in most of our lifetimes, the nation's workforce population is going to shrink by a massive 40%, right? And so when you've got very significant demographic headwinds that your nation is facing, unless you tap into the existing talent pool that includes both men and women, it's going to be very, very hard to sustain growth long term.
Thank you. What about you, Kesara? I mean, Thailand seems to be performing well according to Irene's charts, but what's your view?
Hi, Kathy and Angela. It's my pleasure to be here. I have to say that in Thailand, we have lots of women that work in the C-suite side and others. But if you notice that normally for Thai people, all the family would be the most important factor to them. In the old days, women tend to be work at home. So I think just lately, during these 20 years or just 10 years, that Thai women has been working in the companies, and they're just starting. I still believe that in the next few years, you will see that lots of Thai women would be in the great position. Right now, we are seeing that a lot of Thai women are CEO. You mentioned that like in Thailand, you can see that our Secretary General of the Securities Exchange Commission is ladies too. We have the central banks who the governor is a ladies. And also that are like the exchange, I myself, the head of the exchange, is ladies too. And I would say that in terms of the percentage of the board of director as a women in Thailand would be like 15%. But I'm sure that in the next few years, they are lining up because of we just starting the women world in Thailand. And they have a lot of good women and great women. And we are seeing more and more women on the top management level and in the board. I have to say that the organization that I have passed through, everyone just say that just leave some area for the guys because of like the Thai exchange, we have 70% of women. This is both the top management and the lower PR and all the staff. And even in other financial institutions, you will see that lots and lots of women on board. And I'm sure that it's just a kind of just a few years that you are going to see all kind of these figures in Thailand. Thank you.
Thank you, Kesara. And Zarinah, obviously Malaysia is the poster country for women on boards in East Asia. How did that come about? Apart from the quota, the obvious quota, who was the champion for that?
Well, I think, the government intervention is very important. We've got to get the gender diversity conversation on the table in a much more formal manner, because leaving it to the companies to make it happen, it's not going to happen, as we have seen. Although, Irene calls it a quota, we do not have any sanctions for non-compliance, and because it's not legislative, it is a target that's stipulated in our Code of Corporate Governance, and that's picked up by the stock exchanges listing rules requiring companies to comply with the provisions of the Corporate Governance Code. But nonetheless, I think what is important is to actually establish an ecosystem and approach this as we would approach any business imperative, in a structured and very systematic manner. So back in 2011, the government announced the target of 30% women in leadership positions in the public sector. I was then chairing the Securities Commission Malaysia, and we picked that up in our Code of Corporate Governance and required the PLCs to also follow suit and impose a 30% target for all PLCs in Malaysia. But as you can imagine, trying to get 900 plus PLCs to move from 7% to 30%, and we had a target at that time, a date of 2016. That was just not possible, we found out, that notwithstanding all the hard work that we put in place. So we actually, with the permission of the government, changed the target to concentrate on the top 100 PLCs, because after all, they comprise at that time 86% of the market capitalization. So we felt that lets us focus on the top 100. So we had a lot of engagement, advocacy sessions. Of course, one of the feedback that we commonly heard during those days was, where are we going to find these women? We know we have to do it, but we don't know where are the qualified women whom we can select and appoint to our boards. So, okay, we were not to be daunted. We set up a registry of women candidates. Also, I'd like to mention that in 2015, we launched the Malaysian chapter of the 30% Club. And again, I have to give credit to the government in this case. They were very much involved in initiating that, but we worked together with the regulators and the private sector to try and make this target a reality. So we also set up the Institute of Corporate Directors Malaysia back in 2017. So the Institute set up a registry. We also work with the private sector, consultancy firms who also have got a registry of women candidates. So basically, PLCs that have a vacancy and would like to add directors and women directors onto their board, they can come to us, specify whatever requirements they might have, and we will look at our database and surface a short list of candidates that meet their requirements. Then it's up to the companies to interview and select the right candidate. And we felt that it was also,
Sorry, just to say, Zarinah, so clearly someone in your government has did the math and realised that there's plenty of research that shows that companies that have women on their boards, or a more diverse board generally, tend to perform better financially than companies that don't. So I think that clearly that's what happened in Malaysia. It's happening in Thailand, and of course in Japan you had Womenomics with Prime Minister Abe. Do you think that under your new Prime Minister Suga, you're going to be able to keep up that sort of momentum that started in Japan, Kathy?
I am hopeful. We shall see. But Suga-san was the chief cabinet secretary under Prime Minister Abe. So I kind of described the relationship as Prime Minister Abe was, if he was Batman, then Suga-san was Robin. And so it was clearly actually quite not just womenomics, the agenda of womenomics, but also on inbound tourism and rural reform and revitalization. So Suga-san was actually behind the scenes driving many of the reforms that, frankly, Abe took full credit for and Suga did not. But he has already come out and stated that it is important for women to achieve 30% leadership positions in all parts of Japanese society. Frankly, we're still far, far from that goal, but at least having a goal is better than no goal at all, in my opinion. And I think it's also important to point out that many people don't realize this, but under Abenomics of the last 7+ years, Japan's female labor participation rate, which used to be, the lowest in the developed world, is now the highest, or amongst the highest. It's 71% pre-COVID, of course, which is higher than the U.S. and Europe's average. So the numbers of women working outside the home have thankfully gone up. But of course, the composition, more than half are still working part-time. We still need more women in the pipeline to leadership. So that's really where the work is cut out for Japan.
Right, thank you. So quotas, and I'll put myself out there, I'm for quotas because I think it's important for them to get onto people's agendas, and a lot of people like to be blinkered, and a quota takes the blinkers off. So quotas do seem to be working as accelerants in increasing the number of women directors in Europe, in the US, but also in Asia, in those 4 countries that Irene outlined that do have these quotas. I'm going to ask you again, I know you've been asked 100 times. I mean, what do you think of quotas as a strategy as opposed to self-regulation? Come on down, Kesara.
Hi. So for the quota, I think in Thailand, we haven't been discussed regarding the quota. But what we are doing is, if you know that the ASEAN CG scorecard, they are counting the women on board. At least one woman as an independent director would be measured by the ASEAN CG scorecard. In Thailand, we have about 56% of the listed company who have like one ladies on board as an independent director. But if we count as a kind of independent and non-independent, we have 80% of the listed company who got at least one woman on board. But in terms of the general that you already see, we might be some are good and some are not so good. So it means that about 20% that don't have the women on board so far. So in Thailand, what we talk about the quota, I think this one is a kind of different opinion. What I seeing that the objective of having the board diversity in Thailand, we do know and we agree that board diversity is very important. But once I talk to all the women, the leading women, what they said that as I think as you know that Irene already talked about it. All the qualified women said that they like to be chosen as the board because of their professionalism, their capacity. It's not because of the quota. And I still believe that in Thailand, they have more and more women on board. And in Thailand, I have to say that all the measurement that we are imposed, all the some kind of standardization as an international standard, we would use a kind of voluntary basis during and we incentive them, like incentivize them to give a kind of bonus score for them just for a while. But after a few years, and we know that they can do very easily, we would move it to become a regulation. But in Thailand, what we are seeing that during the past few years, we are seeing that more and more women on board. And I have to say,
self-regulation. You're saying self-regulation and voluntary reform is working well in Thailand.
It is, and I think that if we use this kind, we can see that 80% already have one woman on on board.
Although
I'm
the
sure that
the stats say that, you know, you need to have 2 women on a board to kind of create that kind of a difference. I mean, 1 woman is great, but 2
right.
women, yeah,
But I
create
am like, even
a
right
voice.
now, I'm the chairperson of 2 listed company already, and I
Yeah.
see that more
Yeah.
and more women as a chair ladies, and even the head of the audit committee, and I have 2 as a chair ladies, and another 2 position would be the head of the audit committees, and I see that this one is very easy that Thai women would become the chairperson or even the directors on the
Okay.
board.
Well, that fingers crossed that can continue with its own momentum. Obviously, Zarinah, you have got your quota in place, and the numbers speak for themselves. What's the next step? I mean, are you trying to? You're not having an issue that had happened in Northern Europe where there was a quota and the same women were appearing, you know, being selected to go on boards. I mean, what's the depth of variety among women on boards in Malaysia, and how are you training women up to be ready to come on boards without going through an old boys club? Or hopefully you've got an old girls club soon.
Yes, I mean, I think we are concentrating on building the talent pipeline amongst women. So besides, of course, that registry of women candidates, where we also provide evaluation as to whether they are competent and ready to sit on boards. We offer training if they're not, before putting them on our register of members. And then we also have a mentoring scheme where, in fact, yesterday we celebrated the successful completion of our 5th cohort of mentors and mentees and launched our 6th. We've got a great group of senior, very distinguished corporate leaders, mostly male, who took on the responsibility of mentoring our selected women candidates. And I'm very glad to say that we have had some success. We've managed to place about 27% of the women who graduated from this mentoring program onto boards of companies. And then at the 30% club.
And what you're describing, though, is a new club where you're bringing together established male directors with aspiring female directors. So it's kind of a mixed club. Yeah.
Yes. That's right, and that's what makes it work. I think people, the more senior directors feel a sense of satisfaction that they are able to actually groom and nurture aspiring women candidates, and many of them have actually been very supportive, and they have actually helped to place some of their mentees onto boards, because a personal reference, of course, is extremely important. And then at the 30% club, we also have a group working on the C-suite. So we work with the CEOs and HR directors of companies to try and help them build, policies to ensure that in terms of recruitment as well as career progression and promotion, that there is a balanced gender approach, and so we can build a pipeline to ensure that there are women candidates for consideration when it comes to promotion.
Okay, thank you so much. Kathy, another sort of contentious issue. I mean, some jurisdictions do have term limits for directors. You can, usually it's up 2 terms of 3. But do you think that having term limits in various countries opens up board seats for women? And what about age limits? I mean, you can't be a judge in certain countries once you're over the age of 72. Should we just put more people on the board and just bring more women in to increase the diverse numbers, the gender diverse numbers on boards? I mean, there are plug-ons and plug-ins that we could be thinking about. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think personally I am pro instituting term limits like we have them in politics. So why don't we have them to, govern our boards of our most important companies in each of our countries? I think that makes total sense. And I have seen not just here, but in other jurisdictions, that there is actually, if you look, seek and you shall find a very wealthy pool of female talent who could be easily qualified for many Japanese boards, but they're just waiting, right? And the longevity rates here are very long. Japanese people live a long time, so you could be waiting a very long time for an opportunity, to emerge. So I think that it makes sense. On age, it's a little tricky, right? This country is an aging population. So where do you draw that line? Is it trickier subject? If I could just also, though, go back to the earlier comments, if I may. Sure. A friend of mine from Norway, we're talking about quotas, and of course, we've seen all the evidence that, of course, it produces results. Why wouldn't it? However, what this person told me was after they did that in Norway, the issue was they found that there wasn't the same, of course, rate of change when it came to insider directors, right? So women coming up the executive pipeline into those executive management positions, there was actually very little movement. I'm not sure what the most recent stats show, but I also want to encourage, we're talking, I think, mainly about people from the outside coming and joining boards, right? And non-exec directors. But we also, I think, to the comments earlier from Malaysia, we really need to focus also within the pipeline internal to companies and really groom those women for promotion opportunities, for retention, and ultimately to important decision-making roles, because those are the people that usually make it to the CEO position, the ultimate leadership position. So I just didn't want to leave this conversation without kind of addressing that very important piece in my view.
Exactly. And what about you, Zarinah, in terms of age limits or term limits in Malaysia?
In Malaysia, we do impose a term limit for independent directors. They can serve up to 9 years. But if the company would like to extend that, then they just become non-independent directors. So but the fact is that they still stay on the board. So really, we encourage companies to try and expand the board to incorporate women. And also when a director does retire or steps down from his position, then to encourage the companies to actually recruit a suitable woman as replacement.
Right. And I suppose, Kesara, that's a similar thing for you. I mean, you're happy to grow the numbers via adding on new board directorships. And is there a
yes,
a term
limit? In Thailand we do have the term limit, but we impose to independent directors 9 years or 3 terms. It is the same as Malaysia. And the age, I think we are recommending about 70 to 72, and I think some of the bank already imposed this one, which is I think they like to kind of turn to a younger blood that we are seeing this trend.
Yeah. And I think that the issue is it's in Asia in particular, the non-independent directors are often members of the family or long-standing shareholders, and it's kind of difficult to bump them off because they're often founders or children or relatives of founders. So the willingness to bring on the right number of independent directors, be they men or women, is vital, I think, to good corporate governance in the first instance. I can't believe that this has gone so quickly, because I think we could be talking for a long, long time. But thank you so much, the three of you, Kesara, Kathy, Zarinah. It was a pleasure to see you and a pleasure to talk to you, even in a virtual sense. Thank you so much for your time. Irene, back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, and Zarinah, and Kesara, and Kathy Matsui. Just a comment. In this study, what really puzzled me is precisely what Kesara was talking about. In Thailand, in Singapore, in Taiwan, in China, there are tons of women who head up companies. So there's this dichotomy between having so many women who run big business enterprises and then a lack of women being asked to be on boards. So that needs to be addressed. And another thing, quota laws were meant to increase the number of women on boards. They weren't meant to increase the number of women in senior management or to improve access to CEO suites. Or, they did exactly what they were supposed to do, increase the number of women on boards. That means companies then still have to create the pipeline, as Kathy Matsui was saying earlier. So let's look at this issue now from the top, from the CEO perspective, because they're still in charge in great numbers. That is why at every Global Summit of Women, we have a CEO forum so that we can hear from the men who run major enterprises and who have a say many times as to who should be on a board. So how fortunate we are to have two wonderful CEOs with us today. And again, Angela will be conducting this session to ask them not only their perspective on the report from their point of view from the top, but also what about gender diversity in the Asia Pacific region in general. So back to you, Angela.
Thank you so much, Irene. We're very lucky to be joined today by two very distinguished male executives in this region. I'd like to welcome Kishore Ponnavolu, who's the president of MetLife Asia. He's based in Hong Kong here. Hi, Kishore. He looks after the company's business in Asia, including Japan. Asia, of course, is MetLife's second largest market and MetLife is the largest retail life insurance business here. So we all say hi. We've also got Jim Beltashek, who's the managing director of 3M Korea and vice president of 3M's Asia Corporate Affairs Unit. Hi, Jim. Jim's been with the company for 33 years. I should just say, for several years. We don't want anyone to and has looked after many of the organisation's global businesses, including in the US, Europe, and in Asia. So thank you both for carving out a bit of time for us this morning. As Irene just said, she went through the report a little bit, showed us some slides. Progress is uneven and frankly disappointing in Asia. Just a couple of quick comments from each of you about why you think that might be in our particular region. Both of you have been here for a while, in and out, so you must have formed some kind of view, that your dinner party view of why that is. Kishore, can I start with you?
I'm sorry, Angela, you were breaking up just a bit. My audio here is not that clear. Can you repeat that if you don't mind?
Sure. I'm not going to do all my jokes. I'm just going to stick to the actual question. Why do you think that progress has been so uneven in Asia in terms of putting women on boards? In the light of that report, which shows that some countries are doing very well and others, like China, considering the size of the economy and its importance in the region and the rest of the world, why there's this uneven progress in representation of women on boards?
Yeah, clearly, Angela, there is a lot of room for improvement in Asia in general. Obviously, it's 15% from CWDI. Deloitte also kind of in the ballpark range a couple of years ago. And, as you rightly said, Asia is a very complex region. Mm-hmm. And you have, if you take Asia Pac in general, you have Australia and New Zealand, way ahead pulling the numbers up. Mm-hmm. And, you just talked about Malaysia making significant strides. Malaysia, India also catching up and making progress as well in the middle in terms of progress. And you have, what I would say, areas countries where there has to be movement, that would be China. Clearly there's a representation there. And for a mature market, even Japan falls into that bucket where there's significant more opportunity. Now, as I think about it, first thing that came to my mind was workforce participation as a key driver. But then you look at East Asia, workforce participation is actually quite high. Generally workforce participation is about 54 relative to a global 55. And that is pulled down by South Asia. If you take that out of the equation, East Asia is much farther ahead. So there's clearly, a number of forces at play. I mean, here it is what it is in terms of the actual number you're looking at. A lot of work needs to be done on a number of fronts. This is a complex issue. Senior management representation, as Kathy mentioned earlier, is key, is critical, driving that pipeline up. Certainly, cultural factors come into play that needs a significant amount of push and a counter to it. Third thing is, frankly, the need for advocacy organizations. I think the 30% came up, CWDI. There is definitely a need for advocacy in this sector, and it requires a public-private partnership across the board. So those would be some of the areas where I'd point to.
Right. Thanks, Kishore. What about you, Jim? And what are your thoughts about the findings in this report?
Yeah, as I listen to the previous panel and look at the report and trying to validate why, I honestly can't do it. I mean, there is no valid explanation for why. From a logical or data-oriented perspective, there are pools of qualified women candidates that should be on the slates for boards. So I think it comes into this unconscious bias, this cultural thing, and so then I think the more important thing is, okay, we have to understand a little bit why, but then it's what are we going to do about it? And I think that's there are so many things that we can do about it, and we've heard a lot of those things. Continue to advocate, continue to show the data that says that companies with diverse boards do better. We have to continue to I think advocate for that. And then I will just to again maybe try to add something new to this conversation. Last night 3M sponsored a Nobel laureate discussion on being a scientist, and we had as part of that a professor, a female professor from Seoul National University, and so her plea to everybody was to men is do your share of the work at home. And I thought of that, and as we think about STEM and women coming into the workforce in science, her perspective was, as she watches her students go from being students into the workforce, that it's a double challenge for them, because they're still expected to have a career and do their work at home. So as a male representative, that's my commitment, is to make sure that I do my share of the work at home.
I like that. I really like that. You can come around to my house, actually.
Yeah.
So I just to go back to the point that Kishore made and Kathy made in the last panel, it is a lot about bringing people into the light, bringing talent to the fore. So excos within both of your companies, obviously I've spent some time on your websites, and there are good numbers of women on the board, whether they're independent or not independent. So what about the women pushing through? How do you obviously I know how you identify them in the first place. You try to get the best of graduates, and also then attract talent along the way. But how are you keeping them and pushing them through so that they might be leading divisions for your respective companies around the world? I mean, Jim, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah.
Have you got examples about that? That'd be great.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One of the things that we do is as we have slates for new high-level positions, we expect, demand, and follow through on making sure that we have a diverse slate, and then we give that slate an opportunity. And I think that has been something that we've been doing for a few years, and I think that is why we've been fairly successful. We know we still need to do more in increasing the diversity of our management team, our upper management team. But I think that is one key that we've done.
More revelation about discoverability about gender diversity on your website.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. We are working on that for sure, because I mean, that conversation. So for everybody listening, Angela noted that maybe it was a little harder to find than she would have expected when she came to our website. And so for me and our team, as we hear a comment like that, my comment to you at that time was that is not us, because it is such a priority for us from every level of the organization. So we know that we need to address that. So thank you.
Yeah, no, just shout about it. I mean, if you're proud of it, say it. I think that's a great marketing tool for you as well to attract women to the company, right?
Right.
And Kishore, what about you? What's happening with MetLife?
Angela, this is such a priority for MetLife. And the MetLife approach to diversity and inclusion and gender representation in particular is much more of a comprehensive culture change orientation, right? And it is very comprehensive. So first of all, we started, and by the way, I have to acknowledge our global D&I head, Cindy Pace, who's a force to reckon with, who's right there leading the charge, along with all of us as leaders. Now, it has to be comprehensive. Now, first of all, what we did was we developed a partnership with United Nations Compact and United Nations Women to come out publicly and assert accountability with regards to gender representation and inclusion in broader terms. And we were the first life insurer in the United States to actually sign the Women's Empowerment Program. So it was not only certified by the board, signed by the CEO, signed by the executive team, but we had all the country general managers and country heads sign the WEP. So that is basically us going out and asserting that we are going to do this, right? And this is a priority for us. Now, in terms of
and is it in your KPIs, Kishore?
It is in my KPI. So that I was going to get to, so maybe I'll just keep it short.
Okay.
The proof is in the pudding. So if you think about our global hires, 50%, over 50% of our global hires are women. 40% of our managers globally are women. And 30% of our board is represented by women board members. 30% of the executive group, I'm a part of the executive group, are women. And even when it comes to Asia, if you just take the business leadership, a third of my business leadership are women leaders. And about 28%, 27% are female at the Asia leadership group in broad terms. Now, are we calling this a victory? By no means, right? So there are two things that I emphasize from a MetLife approach is I wouldn't say unique, but I feel proud, is the focus on culture change across and driving inclusion across the organization. We do an annual survey called My Voice. We track inclusion as a very key metric, and we look at progress against that metric. It's a high priority for MetLife Asia as well. And then the second thing is workforce analytics. It is very, very important to make sure that we have our eye on the ball, along with KPIs, and to be able to measure and track against the progress you're making.
Thank you.
So it has to be a comprehensive thought process here.
A 360 process. Jim, I know that 3M is working on that as well. Can you tell us a little bit about the D&I approach with your company?
Absolutely. So I think, and we do think about diversity and inclusion while together, also think about them separately, because I think the diversity part is the metrics. And as Kishore said, as I said earlier, we're making progress, compared to maybe some of the data that Irene would have talked about before. I think we're slightly ahead. But we know we need to do more from a diversity perspective. From an inclusion perspective, we also do an inclusion index annually, or hopefully we will start to do that more often. Because what we found is, if you concentrate on diversity, you bring people to the table. But if you don't listen to them, it really doesn't. You don't get the benefit of diversity. And I will give one example that I'm proud of our company for doing. Our CEO formed an inclusion council, so diverse leadership from all over the company, really focused on what can we do, and giving a real voice to the senior leadership on what we can do. One of the things that we did is earlier this year, before COVID, at our annual leadership conference, we brought in some diverse talent that we had brought in to 3M and that had left. And so we have the top 150 people, leaders of the company, listening to them tell about their experience. And it was 10 months ago, and it still brings chills to me, just the quietness in that room of having all of those leaders, hearing the feedback, real, live and in person, from people that maybe didn't feel as included as they would like. And so then we take and and we have this awareness to allies, to advocates. How do we, it's not enough to be aware. It's now we have to turn that into action. How do we advocate for those people? How do we support and make sure they're included in every aspect of the company? So that's one thing that really stands out in my mind, that is actionable and that we're doing.
Yeah, I love the idea of that incredibly uncomfortable meeting with your senior management and the exit interviews from hell. I always wonder what happens to all that work that's done as people leave your company, and what happens to that data. So it's really interesting to think that 3M is applying that to their internal practices and policy making. So generally speaking, D&I receives a little bit less airtime in Asia compared to the West. Is it harder to build that kind of cohesion and consensus on D&I in this part of the world than, say, in North America or in Western Europe, Kesara?
Angela, I refuse to take a backseat to my colleagues in West in Europe
I like aggression.
Go. Frankly, being part of a global company has its many advantages, and this is one of those. And D&I is a global priority for MetLife, and MetLife Asia is very much part of it. Everything that is global applies very much to Asia as well. Now, this is not to say that there's no local flavor to diversity. It obviously varies on a country-by-country basis. But with regards to gender diversity and inclusion, now I was just referring to the racial and ethnic diversity part, but with regards to gender diversity and inclusion, they're very much in line with the rest of the company.
Okay. And Jim, I mean, is it a global policy, or is it a global policy with, regional characteristics?
No, I would say, I mean, from our standpoint, our approach is, diversity and inclusion is a priority everywhere. Leaders own that. I own that. I brought with me my legacy, because Irene showed the data, and I think Asia is different, but I'm in Korea. We have Korea, Japan, North Asia, maybe a little trailing from a country perspective, those some of the other areas in Asia, but still, so Post-it note, we've shown that there's power in writing it down. So writing it down is more likely to make it happen, right? So this is what I wrote down when I came here, that in Korea I want to improve the diversity on our leadership team here and really upgrade the female pipeline. And then same thing from an Asia perspective is upgrade the female pipeline. Make sure that we are providing the development support to our high potential female leaders. And so that's I think that ownership is necessary everywhere. And as a company, I would say we own that. Not that everybody's expected to write it on a Post-it note, but I would say all of my peers all over the world have this same expectation for sure.
I love post-it policy. I think that's fantastic. And it's great to have something that you can just look at. Either it just jogs your memory or you think to yourself, hell, I did that, tick.
That's right.
Great. Oh, you're back, Kishore. I didn't know where you'd gone there. I thought you were running off to get your own post. This is what just to circle back to the report, just literally a one-sentence answer from each of you on this one. I mean, quotas, government regulation, self-regulation. What do you think? What do you think personally works? I mean, I'm not talking about what your company thinks, although perhaps you could tell me what the company line is. Kishore, what do you think is going to work just to sort of move the needle a bit faster?
Yeah, there is an easy answer to just basically to move to a metric, which would be, of course, if you put a quota in, the metric moves.
Yeah, what gets measured gets done. Yeah.
Yeah, but lasting change, lasting impact, and also translating to full benefit of the whole pipeline. I would say, advocacy combined with governance code strengthening, combined with education, would be the way to go.
Okay, and Jim?
Yeah, my perspective is yes, it's all required, but we've had the opportunity. It's not new that we have women qualified candidates for boards, and the world's not taking enough action. So I think quotas can help, along with everything else is equally or more important for sure.
And just because we're going to have to wind up in a couple of minutes, but just wondered. Black Lives Matter was a huge issue in the middle of COVID. So it's been a year of extraordinary drama right around the world. But how have you been able to interpret the whole ethnic diversity, the importance of ethnic diversity within an Asian context where there is a lot more homogeneous staffing in certain countries? I mean, how do you bring that home to your people? Because it's the left hand to the right. If right hand is gender diversity, the left hand is ethnic diversity as well. How has that been approached within your companies? Kishore, I mean, we've only got a few minutes left, and I know it's a huge topic, but just a little bit of a flavour.
Yeah, it is a huge topic, Angela. And I say, as I started off, Asia is a very complex region with many, many countries. So the pluralistic countries and societies, I think, is where the focus is. So places like India, where there's religious, ethnic, caste, there's a whole bunch of things that come into play.
Yeah.
Whereas, certain countries like Korea tend to be much more homogenous. And so therefore it has to be a market by market, orientation there. But clearly it matters. And organizations like ours, business organizations, have to reflect the communities we serve and the communities that we're part of. So therefore that comes into play.
Okay, thank you. And Jim.
Yeah, I think for 3M, we are headquartered in Minneapolis, St. Paul, where the George Floyd killing took place. So I think, as a company, we have taken a great responsibility in taking action, and we're doing that globally. As we come to Asia, what we are trying to do is make sure that this is not a U.S. racial justice problem, and why are we talking about it here? We're trying to turn the conversation to social justice, social injustice. There are social injustice all over the world in every segment, as as we've talked about, in every location, but they're different. They look different, and so what we're working hard this week. We have a couple of hours with our new leadership on social justice and equity from a global perspective. We're bringing in experts from Asia and talking to our teams about social injustice, listening, trying to figure out where it is that we can put some energy and really make a difference. But I think that key of making sure that this isn't a U.S. problem, and we're trying to make sure that we have that conversation in the right way.
Yeah, exactly. I think that it has to permeate your policies out here, but it can't dominate, because it's a very different environment. But as we work for global MNCs, we have to make sure that we reflect a global culture in many ways, an overarching, brave, decent, and imaginative corporate culture, I think. I believe we're just about at the end of our time here, and it's gone so quickly, and I think we could spend a lot more time discussing not only what goes on in MetLife or 3M, but more of your stories, and we should be giving Kishore time to rush off and get his post-its, but we don't have time for that. But I thank you so much, both of you, Jim, Kishore, for the thought that you've put into this discussion, and I hope we meet again to catch up.
Absolutely.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
for the opportunity.
And thank you. And over to you, Irene.
Well, thank you to all three of you. Angela, as always, for very capable moderating. You're almost like one of the speakers. And thank you to Kishore, and also to Jim Feltusek of 3M. Inclusion is the most important aspect of diversity, whether it's gender diversity, racial diversity. Feeling included and creating a corporate culture of inclusion is a challenge. I always talk about how women are sort of foreigners in the corporate world, in the work world, because it's not a structure, a world and even a language they created. However, we'll keep trying to find ways to not only include women, but also to foster their leadership. Thank you to everyone, to all of you, for listening to this program, for sharing, for hearing the findings in the Asia Pacific region of where women are on corporate boards, and also to hear reflections and opinions and perspectives from our terrific speakers tonight. Thank you, and we'll see you again. Come join us.